What do I really think about the Nissan Patrol? This is a very, very common question that I've had because, well, those of you who know me, know my channel, know that I've never owned one. And this is why. Nissan is, without question, one of the main players when it comes to ongoing production of four-wheel drives. It joins others like Land Rover, Toyota, Jeep, Suzuki, even Dodge. It's the only big player, really, that I've never actually immersed myself in any way at all. So the first generation was the 4W60 in 1951, and then the more recognizable second generation in 1959, which was called the 60 series. There were a number of variants: a wagon, a van, long wheelbase, short wheelbase. I was first introduced to the Nissan Patrol in the form of the Safari. Now, in Japan it was called the Nissan Safari, as it was in South Africa. And my brother-in-law actually was the chief game ranger in a small game reserve not far from where Gwyn and I lived. And we would drive around the park. I would drive my Land Rover, he would drive his Nissan Safari, and I got to respect this vehicle a lot. And he would tell me about, he had other vehicles on the reserve. He had a vehicle called a Nissan Tracker. Nissan Tracker basically was a lightweight pickup with a four-wheel drive system. It was very much of a hash-up of a kind of a. It was a two-wheel drive converted in a South African factory into a four-wheel drive, and actually eventually became a car known as the Nissan Sani. And they were okay. They were. The Nissan Sani was actually really quite good because it was the only stretched station wagon that also had four-wheel drive, because it was based on a pickup and actually had fiberglass body, and it was built in a town called Pietermaritzburg. And I drove one on one of my most memorable trips. I've shared the story previously on the channel. Through Lesotho at a place called Setlabatebi National Park. And it took us 9.5 hours to do 32 kilometers. Not because there was anything wrong with the vehicle, it was very, very rough. They were not great off-road vehicles. They weren't. They had very little wheel travel, they're a bit stiff. The V6 engine was great on the open road, actually a bit awkward to drive off-road, had all its RPM came in late, typical V6. And but we enjoyed the car, and I enjoyed that car, and that was of all my experiences with Nissans, that was the one that stands out even today. But the Tracker, which was again a derivative of a pickup, but it remained a pickup, was awful. It wasn't good. It was, and he would say, you know, they had a contract with Nissan South Africa, and they would buy a batch of vehicles, and they would say that a Tracker on average would last about 18 months, at a stretch 2 years, and it would be wrecked. It would just be in bits. And they had Hiluxes which would be in a similar state after 5 years, and Nissan Safaris which would even last even longer. So the Nissan Safari had already stamped its imprint in my mind of being a very, very robust vehicle. So that was my first taste of the Nissan as a brand. But I've never been a Nissan man. When it comes to brands, my impression is that they are every bit as well built as a Land Cruiser. Now, if you read Toyota's history of the different vehicles that come out, the one that is, I think, most familiar to us is the GQ. Interestingly enough, they have the G in Australia. They have the GQ and they have the GU. Actually, both of those are designated GR, left-hand drive, in other countries. So it can actually get a little bit confusing. But we know them as the GQ. The reason why that model, which was the fourth generation, the Y60, brought out in 1987, didn't appeal to me at all because it was just so ugly. I mean, heaven forbid it was ugly. One of the first ones I photographed, I was actually writing my book at the time, my first book at the time, and all that chrome, because in South Africa they only brought the top models in. They didn't bring the other models that actually were less blingy. They looked better because they had less chrome on them. We only got this incredibly ugly chrome thing. And of course, you know, I just went, oh my heavens, could it be any uglier? But a lot of people like them. But mechanically, they're actually very, very good. And they're still very popular in Australia amongst four-wheel drive enthusiasts. Madly popular. They go for quite high prices considering how old some of them are. And if you find one of those with a low mileage, go for very high prices. And for good reasons. Now, they had a mixture of engines. Some were much better than others. They were, you know, if I look at the two and I see Toyota Land Cruiser and Nissan Patrol, they were running parallel in terms of I'm talking about the pickups. And then, of course, the station wagons, the GU compared not unfavorably with the 80 series. And I regard the 80 series Land Cruiser as one of the highlights in the four-wheel drive in the world in terms of the four-wheel drive calendar of great vehicles. The 80 series was a really brilliant vehicle. The GU, it stands happily alongside it. The one thing that the Patrols had over the Land Cruisers, and still do to this day to a point, are the underpinnings, suspensions, drivetrain, not so much the gearboxes. So they had some problems with some of their gearboxes, as did a few of the Toyotas, but certainly the axles, suspensions, linkages, chassis, frame, you know, all of that kind of stuff, very strongly built. If anything, stronger than Land Cruiser. Similar to, I would say, similar to, in terms of the build, to the Geländewagen. If you look underneath a Geländewagen and you look under a Patrol, you'll see very heavy, you know, the tie rod ends, that kind of stuff. Meaty. So of course they got a very, very good reputation for being able to withstand, as I like to say, drivers with little mechanical sympathy. But they were designed for that. And in fact, that vehicle is no longer for sale in Australia. It's still sold in the Middle East, because so many non-governmental organizations, that's the kind of car they want. So NGOs now buy Land Cruiser 70 series. Okay, remember, simple, straightforward, reasonably easy to work on, solid axles, which means can withstand more punishment and more able to withstand drivers with low mechanical sympathy. That's why the Land Cruiser still, the 70 series Land Cruiser is still popular in those countries, as so is the Nissan Patrol, because it's built to the same. But a Nissan Patrol of the same era is far more comfortable than a 76 Land Cruiser. It's bigger, it's more comfortable, it's nicer to drive, it probably has a higher safety rating, I'm not sure, than a Land Cruiser 70 series. And if you put the two next to me today and you said, okay, you need to choose one of them because they're both station wagons, robust and all of the things I've just ticked off, I'd take a Patrol before I would take a 70 series like 76. No question about it. But of course, most countries, they're no longer sold. They also have a 5-link rear axle, so when the Land Cruiser, of course, they kept the coils in the front and went to leaf springs in the back in the 70 series. Nissan Patrol also did that with the 2-door variant, and they went because it's a load carrier. And actually, again, load carrying in many respects, leaf springs a bit better. It's a little bit easier to service, a little bit more robust than coil springs, and it's simpler and cheaper to make. But for ride, safety, handling, coil springs better. End of story. Nissan and Toyota kind of running parallel here. We forget about Land Rover. We're very sorry about Land Rover. You're no longer building adventure cars. You're just building luxury cars now, and it's a pity. Nissan kind of going the same way. Toyota kind of going the same way, but for the 70 series. So the current Nissan Patrol, the Y61 series, is parallels with the Land Cruiser 200/300. Because, to be honest, I think the Nissan Patrol Y62 is considerably better value for money than a Land Cruiser 300. The only reason why I'd buy the Toyota, really, is, yeah, I prefer the brand, but really, it's got a much more frugal engine. The engine, it means I'm going to get more range out of the car. The turbo diesel engines give me quite a bit more range than the petrol engines. Now, the Nissan petrol is a bit thirsty, as is the V8 Land Cruiser 200/300, which we never got in Australia. They're very similar. Which one, if I chose right now, and the engines weren't an issue in terms of range and fuel economy, I would buy a 200 Land Cruiser before I bought a Y61 Patrol, but I would buy a Y61 Patrol before I bought a 300 Land Cruiser. Because these vehicles are now going more and more and more and more on the luxury side, okay, and less and less on the off-road side, by the nature of the way they're made and designed. You can understand it, that's the market. But if you're wanting a vehicle that's going to do really good off-road and really good on-road, then they're both very similar, aren't they? It would be a difficult choice for me, because I would have this brand thing, you know. As I said before, I'm not big on the Nissan brand. But as I say, for what they are, irrespective of brand, you look at the Nissan Patrol, and what is the Nissan Patrol, particularly the older ones, they were very well made. Some of the engines were outstanding. I mean, for example, I've got it written down here, which was the TB48DE, the 4.8 straight six. They've managed to get over 2,000 horsepower out of that engine. You've probably seen these crazy guys in the Arab world going up these dunes, these near vertical dunes, where the engine is actually running on its rev limiter. So imagine a traction control like this, all right? Maximum power, 0 power. Maximum power, 0 power. 500 times a second. Imagine, think about the traction control. They are managing with that thing, it's not just the power, it's that. On the rev limiter, and those vehicles climb dunes that nothing else will climb. So I kind of wish I could get more involved with the Nissan brand, because I feel perhaps I've lost out a bit. But if I think about it, one of the things that contributed to me not getting too many Nissans was that when the Pathfinder came out, I took it on a trip to Mozambique with my mate John Rich, and we were doing sand track driving, and it was very poor, to the point where eventually I could see John, who's an outstanding four-wheel drive instructor, very, very good driver, rolling his eyes at me. Andrew, a BMW X5 just did that. Yeah. You know, can I? Of course you can, John. Go for it. Yeah, you see.
She's deep now, this hole.
He couldn't get it through either. He could not get it through.
She's driving up there, even when the front wheel pitches in, Andrew.
Yeah.
You see what happened on that particular slug?
Yeah.
Is that you've got a complete cross axle. The hole here, which is throwing the front wheel up on it. Okay, that hole is actually very, very deep.
I'd probably had 8 attempts and said, car can't. Now, from this point, I'm potentially going to damage the car. At that point is when I say, no, getting across that obstacle is not worth it, because if it was mine, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't damage my car. I'm not going to do that with a press vehicle either. So I got to the point where I'm not going to try anymore. He tried 5 times, different gear ratios and different thing, came back and said, this thing's hopeless.
I think I can safely say that the
the Pathfinder is a street car. It has low range, but to be a real four-wheel drive, you need two key ingredients, and I've said this so many times. You need low range and you need decent clearance. The Nissan has low range, it does not have decent clearance, and I would say inadequate. Yes, these are tough obstacles, but every other vehicle, and there were 14 in the convoy, managed to climb this hill with moderate ease. Not this vehicle. And poor wheel travel and very poor clearance. And it was one of the, you know, and you know, a lot of you know my attitude to Pajero, Mitsubishi Pajero, which I don't think is a bad vehicle. I just think that, you know, as a standard vehicle on its own, it's quite poor off-road, but actually with a bit of tweaking, it's not bad at all. It was the owners I was complaining about more than the vehicle. I'll tell you something, a Pajero is better than the Pathfinder off-road. It certainly was in the environment we were driving it, which was very, very lumpy sand tracks, which I drove the Pajero in Namibia on very similar terrain. The Pajero would have outperformed, convinced of it, outperformed the Pathfinder. So when I did my report, I pulled back on my, you know, I was trying to be nice, and this is the great difficulty with the journalist when you get given a vehicle and then you do something with it. And of course Mitsubishi never spoke to me after the Pajero debacle, because I had to be honest, kept on getting stuck, kept on scooping up sand. And Pathfinder, even worse, because we weren't nearly as heavy as we were in the Pajero. We had nothing on the roof. On the roof, it's not only the weight, it's also the center of gravity. So the vehicle does this, and you've got this weight on the roof actually throwing the vehicle backwards and forwards. It's one of the weaknesses, for example, of the troop carrier. It does so many things well, but for very tough off-road driving, it's not great, mainly because it's top heavy, that weight up top. Okay, this is one of the limitations. It has so much going for it, as far as I'm concerned. Every vehicle has its compromise. That's the troop carrier's compromise. But the compromise of the Pathfinder is that it is a poor off-road performer, and this was my experience anyway. And also it had a design fault that I'm sure I can actually still feel. I don't know if I've got footage. I'll go and look now to see if I've got footage. A few things that I've driven myself and my cameraman nuts, and the worst of them is this here. This here, the designers, they weren't tall. I can tell you that, because if they were, they would have nailed their heads on this while developing this vehicle, and they would have changed it. And twice I impaled my head, and my camera assistant, Steve Searle, if you're watching this, Steve, you'll remember. You walked straight into that terribly badly designed tailgate. So while the trip was good, the vehicle, we had to come back with some quite negative reports on it, and of course that's why I don't get calls. I'm not on the press list. When somebody launches a new vehicle, St Pierre White is not on the press list, because hey, if he finds something that he doesn't like, he's going to talk about it. And that's why I've said 100 times why I don't get invited to things. So that, guys, is why I've never been big on Nissans, and I have friends that have said that they have loved their time with the Nissan Patrol and think it is an exceptionally good vehicle, and I respect them, you know, and I can see no reason why not to believe that they're fantastic. But there's one thing that has happened over the last decade in Australia, and that is that the Nissan Patrol is now associated with bogans. For those of you in different countries, a bogan is basically an Australian redneck. So whenever I have been driving off-road in this country and I have come across a driver driving, like on the Canning Stock, nearly had a head-on collision, every single 15 to 20 minutes I'm radioing. I know that within 5 k's ahead of me, any cars coming in the opposite direction is going to hear my transmission. Channel 40, I seem to remember, okay? 2 vehicles southbound. That's all you got to say. If they hear you, then they know. Okay. And every now and again, crackle, 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 3 vehicles northbound. Then you know, slow down maybe, keep a good lookout. Ah, there they are. Almost had a head-on collision, no radio calls, no nothing. He wasn't obviously listening to the radio or taking notice of the radio. He certainly wasn't broadcasting. Nissan patrol going as if it was a racetrack. Let's see how fast he could do the Canning stock route. And when I saw that, I thought, yeah, you are why so many people don't drive Nissan patrols, because they don't want to be associated with people like you. 3 years ago, in my green troop carrier, I drove a little thing on my own up through the dunes onto a beach and to film something, and I had stopped in the middle of a road. Yeah, maybe I should have pulled over, but there was nobody around. But anyway, and I was letting down my tire pressures, and 2 Nissan patrols came up, and I went, and I moved to just climb in my car and just move it. No, they couldn't wait. They couldn't even wait for me to the 30 seconds or less for me to just move to the side. They came past me, both sides, and I'm like this against the side of my car, thinking, what? But of course, they were both Nissan patrols. They both had enormous wheels on them. That is the sad thing, the saddest thing about the Nissan patrol, is because that kind of behavior has driven a lot of Nissan patrol lovers to go and find comfort elsewhere. So that's why you will not find me purchasing a Nissan patrol, old or new or anything, because I don't want to be tarred with that brush. That's me. Until next time, thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. If you are a true adventurer at heart, join us at overlandworkshop.com as some of the world's most experienced overland explorers share their secrets of successful expedition travel.